All right, so we like to go deep on this show, and you sent us a whole stack of papers about technology in sports, and wow, it really got me thinking.
It is a fascinating topic,
Oh
isn't it?
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, is a runner with the latest shoes really competing,
Yeah.
at the same level as someone with last year's model? I mean,
That's a great question, and it really gets to the core of what we're diving into today, this whole idea of fairness in the digital age of sports.
right.
How tech has changed not just the way sports are played, but the very idea of what's considered fair.
Exactly. These papers from Diarmia Sailors, they're all looking at it from different angles.
They are.
But that underlying question is the same. Is technology leveling the playing field or tilting it
Yeah.
in ways we don't expect?
Right. And one thing that really struck me when I was reading these was how sometimes the technology IS practically the sport itself. Dyer uses Formula One racing
Oh, yeah.
as a prime example.
Makes sense.
The constant evolution of those cars, it's like it's practically baked into the competition.
So is it about the driver's skill or the car's performance? I mean, where do we even draw the line?
That's becoming more and more difficult to answer as technology advances. And Dyer brings up this idea of an optimal limit, a
Yeah.
point where technology might completely redefine what a sport is rather than just how it's played.
Okay, I am hooked. So Dyer's paper goes on to outline like 6 key ways technology is impacting sports, and some of these are
Oh, yeah.
seriously controversial.
Uh,
Let's start with assistive technology, like the case of Oscar Pistorius.
right. His prosthetic legs, they sparked this massive debate
Oh, yeah.
about what constitutes an unfair advantage. I mean,
Was he competing on a level playing field, or did the prosthetics give him an edge?
it was a really tough question. And
Yeah.
he was initially banned and then the ban was overturned.
Exactly. It was back and forth.
It really was. And it highlighted that ethical tightrope walk that we're on now.
Yeah.
When does assistive technology cross that line into enhancement?
And who gets to decide that?
Yeah, it challenges our assumptions about human potential, and what it means to compete fairly. And it's not just the athletes themselves.
Yeah.
It's the equipment, the rules, how sports are played and judged.
Yeah, like safety equipment.
Yeah.
Mila talks about boxing headgear
Yes.
and how it might actually lead to more risky behavior.
That's right.
And even in football, I mean, those helmets
Of course.
are designed to protect players, but some argue that they lead to more aggressive tackles.
Yeah, it's this unintended consequence. Sailors refers to it as the revenge effect, where solutions can actually create new problems,
Sort of making things worse in the name of safety.
potentially.
Yeah.
It's something to consider. And it's not just about the physical risks either, right? Think about technology's impact on access and parity. Remember those full-body swimsuits?
Oh, yeah. Speedo fast skin suit.
Exactly. Revolutionary, but crazy expensive.
They were.
So it created this situation where only certain athletes could afford the best technology.
Right.
And that gives them a potential advantage, even if the tech itself isn't illegal.
So it's like an arms race then.
Yeah, in a way. And this issue of access to technology, it's still a major concern, especially as innovations get even more complex and expensive. It makes you wonder, are we prioritizing the athlete with the best tech over the athlete with the most skill and dedication?
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So we've got the athletes themselves being affected, the equipment they use,
Mm-hmm.
but these papers also talk about how technology is changing how sports are officiated. Dyer dives into this whole idea of non-human decision-making.
Right. And he breaks it down into 2 main categories: video replay and line judgment technology. Video replay has been huge
Oh, yeah.
in a lot of sports,
Absolutely.
but it has its critics.
Definitely. I mean, like in football,
Yeah,
it slows the game down,
it does.
and it can lead to some pretty contentious calls.
Right. So it makes you wonder, are human errors just part of the game's charm, or are they just frustrating inconsistencies? And where is that balance between human judgment and using technology for perfect accuracy?
And then there's the line judgment tech, like goal line technology in football.
Mm-hmm.
Was it really necessary? Did it take away from the human element of the game?
These are really philosophical questions, and it speaks to something that Mia brings up, like, what happens when we strive for perfect accuracy,
Hmm.
but at the expense of the spirit of the sport? Are we losing something essential in the pursuit of quantifiable results?
And what about the role of governing bodies in all of this? Dyer points out that they often struggle to keep up with the pace of technological change.
And their decisions, or sometimes indecisions, can have a huge impact on how technology shapes the future of sport. And what Dyer found was that, these delays often lead to more controversy and debate, as we saw with the Pistorius case.
It's almost like they're a referee trying to
Yeah.
keep up with players who are constantly, like, rewriting the rule book.
Exactly. And that constant rewriting is another thing that Dyer explores, this concept of de-skilling versus reskilling.
Okay.
He uses the example of the square groove golf clubs
I remember those.
that were banned because they made the game too easy.
So technology can actually make a sport less challenging.
In some cases, it seems like it can. And it raises the question of what skills do we actually want to see showcased in a particular sport? Is it about mastering a specific technique? Or is it about adapting to new technologies and pushing the limits of what's possible?
Right. I remember a similar debate around the Superman cycling position.
Right.
It was eventually banned
Right.
because it was seen as too radical.
Too different.
Yeah, even if it didn't give a clear advantage.
Almost like this clash between tradition and innovation. It seems like the soul of the sport, its essence is something a lot of people are worried about losing.
And that's where Mia's paper really gets into the philosophical side of things, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
He asks us to think about what truly matters in sports.
Yeah.
Is it about natural talent, or is it about striving for perfection no matter the means?
And he uses a great example, this idea of hypoxic chambers, which simulate high-altitude training. They're not illegal, but they do raise these questions about what's fair play. Is it cheating to use technology to mimic conditions that some athletes have natural access to?
It really blurs the lines.
Yeah.
So are we headed towards a future where technology dictates the boundaries of human potential in sports?
That's a question we can't ignore. And as technology keeps evolving at this, unprecedented pace, it's a question that's only going to become more and more pressing.
Wow.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
It is.
So we've got athletes using technology. The equipment is being impacted by technology.
Yeah.
Even the way sports are officiated.
Mm-hmm.
And, it makes you wonder what's next.
Yeah. Where do we go from here?
That is the question, isn't it?
It is.
And luckily, we've got more time to dig into these papers and try to unpack some of these issues. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into technology and the future of sports.
Yeah, it's a bit like opening Pandora's box, We unleash these technologies, and then we're left to deal with the fallout.
It's almost like that old saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly. And Sailors brings this up when he's talking about running shoes. He argues that some of these modern shoe designs, even though they're technologically advanced, they can actually lead to more injury.
Wait, more injuries? How is that even possible?
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but some of these shoes can actually interfere with the body's natural movement, and over time, they can actually weaken those stabilizing muscles.
Interesting.
So it's that revenge effect we were talking about before. Our attempts to solve one problem end up creating new ones.
So even with something as basic as running shoes, we're seeing these ethical implications.
Yeah.
It's not just about the fancy high-tech stuff.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about what progress really means. Is it always about pushing the boundaries? Or is it sometimes about understanding and respecting our own natural abilities?
Right. And Maya really digs into this idea of respecting the natural in sport.
Yeah.
He talks about how this traditional emphasis on natural talent is being challenged
Mm.
as technology allows us to push past those limitations.
And he even uses this term techno-doping to describe how technology is blurring the lines between legitimate training and artificial enhancement.
Yeah, that's a loaded term for sure. And it makes me think about Dyer's point about how long it takes these governing bodies to catch up with all these advancements. By the time they put rules in place, the technology has often already moved on.
Right. So it's this constant game of catch-up. And in the meantime, athletes and coaches are left to grapple with these ethical questions on their own.
It's like the Wild West out there.
It really is.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate this gray area? If technology is constantly changing the game, how can we even define what's fair anymore?
That's the question, isn't it? That's the million-dollar question.
It is. And Mia proposes that we need to move beyond this narrow focus on, just banning substances
Okay.
and develop a broader kind of performance policy, one that takes into account the ethical implications of technology.
So not just, playing whack-a-mole with whatever the latest gadget is, but actually thinking about the big picture. What do we want sports to be about?
Exactly. And this is where things get really complicated because it involves looking at our values and our assumptions about sports. What do we really prioritize? Is it pushing the limits of human potential? Is it maintaining tradition? Or is it ensuring a level playing field? And often those values, they're in conflict.
It's like we're trying to hold on to the spirit of sport while acknowledging that the playing field may never be perfectly level.
Right, and that tension is at the heart of so many of these controversies that we're seeing today. And Dyer's work on non-human decision-making really highlights this.
Right, video replay and line judgment technology. They're supposed to create fairness and accuracy, but they also add these new layers of complexity, and you can even argue that they change the flow of the game.
Yeah, think about those moments in football where a play is under review for what feels like forever.
It's so long.
It really disrupts the momentum and the emotional intensity of the game.
Yeah, it's like we're sacrificing the human element for the sake of absolute precision.
And that leads to the question, is perfect accuracy always what we want? Is there a place for human error and interpretation in sports? Or are those just relics of the past?
Right, like we're trying to take the human element out of something that's fundamentally human.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to Lowland's distinction between the thin and thick theories of sport.
Oh, yeah. The thin theory focuses on, breaking records, pushing boundaries.
Exactly.
And the thick theory is more about the nuances of skill and strategy, the experience of the moment.
Right, and you can see how technology is kind of pushing us more and more towards that thin perspective. With all the data and performance tracking, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers and lose sight of everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a data geek myself. I love my Garmin.
Sure.
I love tracking my progress. But sometimes I have to remind myself to just enjoy the run,
Yeah.
and not get too caught up in the numbers.
It's a balance we all have to find. And Saylors actually argues that this over-reliance on technology can make us less in tune with our own bodies.
Right, we become reliant on the external cues
Exactly.
instead of listening to what our body's telling us.
And that can make us more prone to injuries, as we see with the running shoes that mess with our natural foot movement. It's a reminder that technology should enhance our abilities, not replace them.
It all kind of ties back to that chip timing controversy we talked about earlier, where sometimes the first runner to cross the finish line doesn't actually have the fastest chip time.
Right, and it makes you wonder, are we putting too much emphasis on this objective measurement of time over the subjective experience of the race itself?
Are we so focused on the data that we've lost sight of what it really means to compete and to win?
It's something to think about for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like we're having to redefine winning now. Is it about crossing the line first, having that fastest time, or is it something totally different?
And that's where we got to be careful, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Technology, for all its issues, can also be a force for good in sports.
Oh, totally. I mean, think about how data analysis has helped athletes train better and avoid injuries.
Absolutely.
And video replay.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it can definitely make things more fair.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot, where technology enhances the sport, but it doesn't fundamentally change it. It's about using tech to level the playing field, not to create new inequalities.
So the challenge is, how do we keep those values at the forefront, as tech keeps evolving?
And Dyer makes this really important point in his paper
Mhm.
about transparency and open discussion. We need to have these conversations, athletes, coaches, fans, policymakers,
Everyone.
everyone, about what we want the future of sports to be.
Yeah, because if we don't, technology is going to decide for us. And we might not like where we end up.
Right. We need to be proactive, not reactive.
Yeah.
Anticipate those ethical dilemmas that new tech brings and come up with ways to address them.
It's almost like we need a new rule book for this digital age of sports.
A new philosophy of sport, maybe. One that recognizes how powerful technology is, but also holds onto those core values that make sports so great. The human drama, the skill, the strategy, those unpredictable moments.
Yeah, so where does that leave us? I mean, what can we do as individuals to make sure that technology doesn't chip away at those values?
I think it starts with awareness, being critical,
Yeah.
Questioning the benefits and the drawbacks, being mindful of how tech is changing our own relationship with sports, and speaking up when we see it being used in ways that undermine fairness.
So it's about remembering that technology is a tool.
It is.
Like any tool.
Yeah.
It can be used for good or bad. We decide how we use it.
And remembering why we fell in love with sports in the first place, Is it about the data that records the tech? Or is it about something deeper, the human spirit, that pursuit of excellence, the thrill of competition, sharing in that experience of pushing our limits individually and together?
Wow, that's a powerful thought. So for all of you listening out there, the next time you lace up your shoes or step onto the field or watch your favorite team compete, think about that. Take a moment to appreciate how human skill and technology are coming together. And ask yourself, what does fair play even mean in this new world of sports? What do we want to protect? And how can we make sure that technology makes the heart of athletic competitions stronger, not weaker?